Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is Lars, and I would like to welcome you back. And as promised, I'm starting my 2023 garden season. Today, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the beginnings of what I do and how I get started in my season. It's a little bit late to be putting this video out for my planting phase, and probably a little bit late for some of the seeds as well, but I'm going to try to cram this in as much as I can. Basically, the first thing I do at the beginning of every season is I try to plan out what my garden is going to look like. And the plan for that for this year is going to be based on my current garden design that I have. I believe, 14, 15 garden beds. I have to count them all up individually because some of them are smaller than others. But um, I have those beds that I've established for the past 6, 7 years now, and my idea is to try to put plants in an area where they're going to grow best. So I'm going to put up a image here that's going to show you kind of what my backyard layout looks like for the garden, and then in each area, I'm going to try to point out precisely what I have here. All right, so what we have here is just a spreadsheet that I pulled up and I kind of turned it into a grid. And I kind of laid out where my garden beds are for the backyard area. So in this part right here, you can see I have them labeled. I don't think I've labeled them all, but bed 1 down here in the lower left is just a 4 foot by 4 foot bed, which right now is filled with asparagus. That is a perennial crop, which I will not have to plant again. That's what perennial means. It comes back year after year. So basically, all I do with that bed is I chop off all of the dead fronds from last year down to soil level or a little bit above, and then new asparagus sprouts pop up, usually in the spring, right around the end of the frost time. Bed number 2 is where I typically put my potatoes. Now, a lot of people have, questions about whether or not they can put the same crop in the same place, or should they be doing crop rotations and so on and so forth. But, when it comes to a small home garden, and this is considered a small growing space when you consider farms and so forth. When you're working on a garden this size, planting the same thing in a bed, I've never had a problem with it in my experience, because every year, as gardeners, we have to take care of our soil. That is first and foremost. Soil maintenance and soil care is something that we really need to pay attention to. A lot of the crop rotation that you hear about, on farms or larger scale agriculture, that's based on the type of farming that they do and soil depletion, and not being able to replenish the correct nutrients necessary for large scale production. But in a small scale garden, backyard garden or whatever, maybe a city garden plot that you have, you're going to be replenishing that every season with compost and other trace nutrients and minerals, using fertilizers, either organic or non-organic. And in that type of gardening, you're replenishing everything pretty much to 100% every season. So there really isn't a problem with planting the same thing in the same place. The only problems you'd run into is if you have diseases. And what happens is the disease will still stay alive in the soil, well, some, throughout the winter. And then the next year, if you grow the same plant in that same space again, that disease will just come out of the soil and attack that plant in the same way. But again, if you have a relatively disease-free garden, that's not something you have to worry about. So since I don't really have any problems with my potatoes, and I'm going to be replenishing the nutrients in the beds every season, this bed here, for bed 2, is where I am going to be putting my potatoes again for this year. Bed 3, right along here, this is all fence line along the left, and then along the back, and then down this side. This is where my fence runs, right here. So along my neighbor's fence to the left here, In bed 3 last year, I grew lettuce. I didn't like having the lettuce there. It was very hard and cumbersome to reach in against the fence, and I just wasn't. I wasn't as attentive to it as I should have been. So I'm probably not going to put lettuce here this year. I'll probably add the lettuce to one of the main beds this year, and then in here I might be putting some either extra plants that I have left over, or I will be adding herbs. I like to grow a lot of herbs in the garden overall, but especially this year I want to focus a little bit more on herbs because, the wife and I, we love cooking, and fresh herbs from the garden when you're cooking. There's just nothing that beats it. So that's going to be that bed there. This bed here is typically onions, and I may do onions in here again, but what I'm thinking this year, because my onions just don't seem to be sizing up the way I like, I may swap out the onions for this bed right here, where I will place the onions, and then in this bed I might put some tomato plants or pepper plants, because for whatever reason this area gets super hot. And I think that, I don't know if it's the way the sun hits the yard or what, but this bed is always super hot. Even though we have some shade over here, there's a tree that kind of overhangs a little bit right here. For whatever reason, it gets super hot right there. So the bed right here will probably end up being peppers, maybe a tomato or two. I'll have my onions in this bed. There's going to be tomatoes in this bed. Over here, this area right here is my trellising, where I will be planting my cucumbers. So you'll have cucumbers that grow up the trellis and over. I'll plant a couple on each side on the right, a couple on the left. And then in the center of the bed here, I generally plant peppers and tomatoes on both sides. This here is going to be also some tomatoes in the back because those are taller plants. And this is north-south. So basically your sun is going to be coming from the south side down here facing this way, so you always want to put the shorter plants in the front of the garden bed and the taller plants in the back. That way the shorter plants won't get shaded out. Now this area here is going to be getting some shade. Okay, so you're going to want to focus more on shade-loving plants for this area back here, because there's going to be tomatoes here, and there's going to be tomatoes here, and tomatoes here. I'm going to have more shade in the back. So any plants that are sensitive to sun exposure, you might want to put towards the back here. So I'll probably again be doing more herbs and extra plants that I have left over that I don't want to let die off, just to see how they grow. I tried zucchini back here last year, but they just didn't size up because of the amount of shade that they got. So the zucchini I'm going to be putting more towards the front of the beds here and here. And then I will have also in the very front of the beds, I'm going to be doing the smaller plants, such as the smaller oreganos. I also have chives, perennial chives in the corners of this bed here. And I have some clematis on an archway here. If they end up coming back, I planted those last year. So again, the main bulk of the bed towards the back is going to be more tomatoes and then peppers, and then cycling down into the shorter plants. In the fronts of these beds, the shorter plants will probably, like the brassicas that I normally would plant over here last year that are going to be moved over to one of these beds. I might do the brassicas here and instead of over here. And then I'll have kale and collard greens as well. Maybe I might put those towards the back because those are larger brassicas for the kale and collards. And then the front, the front of the bed will be reserved for the smaller leaf lettuces like the Bibb, the tango leaf. I have a mixture of, I believe they call it like a chef's mixture, where it's a free leaf lettuce that's red and green. It's got some awesome colors to it. Very tasty. I keep those towards the front because they're shorter. So I don't want the kale and the collards to overshadow them. And then in the front up here, I'll probably be running rows of onions. onions along here. And then, in addition to that, I have some more exotic plants that I like to grow. Some of the exotic chilies don't get very large, so I might be putting the more exotic chili pepper plants towards the front. The pequeño, the not habanero, I'm sorry. I'm thinking the Carolina Reaper. If I end up getting one of those this year, they're kind of hard to find, and I have a very hard time sprouting them. So we have the cucumbers back here, tomatoes and peppers coming up the front with the clematis going around here. And then towards here, towards the right, I'm hoping to get some ground cherries in as well, because ground cherries are always fun to grow. In addition to that, I also have some peas and beans I like to be putting in early on, so I might be putting some peas and beans, bush beans, and then sugar snap peas and things towards the front here, because they're going to get pulled out as the weather warms up. They're a faster growing plant, and the peas, for instance, don't grow well in the heat. So by the time the weather gets warm enough, I'll be able to pull the peas out and put in some pepper plants that are just coming of size. But peas should be going in very soon. If I decide to plant any vining plants this year, it's going to be again towards the back in one of these rows. In this bed back here, I have this pretty much dedicated to my hops. That's what I use. They're a flower that is used, for anyone who doesn't know. Hops is a vining plant that grows very tall, and it grows flowers that you use in beer making. So I have hops all in this bed over here, and they're kind of starting to spill out in this bed here. And the far right of this bed is actually a grapevine that I planted last year, and I'm hoping that it'll come back. If that grapevine does end up taking off again and coming back, I'm going to train it along the fence this direction and that direction as much as I can. There's sun limitations over here, because we have a fence that goes right down here and then a fence over to the left. And so this bed really doesn't get any sun. Right now, all I have are some flowers that were given to me. They belong to my grandfather, that are probably 30, 40 years old. And I ended up taking the rhizomes and the bulbs and planting them in the back here, and they do come up every year. So I might just put some herbs and flowers in this area. But the grapevine, if it does come back, I'm going to be training it this way as far as I can, and then I'll be training it this way heading towards the hops plants. I'm really hoping I can get some grapes out of that. It might take a couple of seasons to get them, but I will try. And until that actually grows, the open space here, I'm going to be focusing more on, like I said, the plants that do not require a lot of sunlight. The extra plants that I have left over that I just don't want to let die off because they're just super healthy. So that's where I'll be putting over here. And hopefully I'll also be having some plantings in the front yard this year too. I don't have any pictures of that. My house is actually right here, and then the front yard is down that way. I don't have anything on that. But basically, this is how my garden is laid out. It's been this way for 6 or 7 years. I've had excellent growth out of this garden. Each of these beds is 12 feet long and 3 feet wide. So I'm able to get at least 2 rows of large plants in here. So when I'm growing tomatoes, for instance, or tomatoes, I can get 2 rows of tomatoes, one along the left and then one along the right. If I'm growing peppers, especially the smaller pepper plants, I can actually get 3 pepper plants in a row wide. I try to go as densely spaced as possible because the more exposed soil you have in your garden, the more opportunity there is for weed growth. And one of the things that I absolutely hate as a gardener is to have to weed all the time. So by keeping your soil covered with plants as much as possible, you minimize the sun exposure to the soil, and that also minimizes weed growth. It doesn't cut it out. You're going to get weeds. I'm going to have a ton of weeds like I always do every year. But when you have the exposed soil, there's just more chance for weed growth. And also, when the sun gets into the hotter part of the year, when you're really getting into those hot months, if the sun is beating down on the soil, it burns away your nutrients. It drives away and kills off microbes. It just really depletes the soil when the sun hits it. So the two ways that I try to mitigate those things, the weeds and then the nutrient depletion, is to plant as densely as possible so that the soil is covered, and that minimizes, microbial death because of sun exposure, and it minimizes weeds having an opportunity to thrive because they don't have access to the sunlight. So I try to plant as densely as possible. As I said, I can get 2 rows of tomatoes, 3 rows of peppers. If I'm growing lettuce, I do a very dense seeding of lettuce in the bed to where the seeds are not separated at all, and I grow them straight from seed, and they come up in rows, almost like what you'd see in a farmer's field if you're looking at rows of soybeans or other wheat that's very densely packed together. So the density of each bed allows for increased yield, and it keeps down all of the destructive properties that the sun has on the soil, as well as reduce weed growth. So that's how I'm going to be dealing with that. I'll be placing mulch down once I get the plants in. The mulch also helps to reduce the weeds. And hopefully I'll be able to get all my plants in. As I said, I'm really hoping to do a few more of the herbs this year, because what ends up happening for me anyway is I get so many vegetables, and there's only so many that we can eat. And having 20 or 30 tomato plants planted in a season means we just literally have 1,000 tomatoes. I think it might have been 2 years ago, we actually had we had 1,000 pounds of produce. That was the year that I measured everything that we grew. And every time I pulled something out of the garden, I threw it on a scale and added it to the measurement. And we had 1,000 pounds of produce out of just this backyard garden. Not only did we have enough for ourselves, we had enough to can, we had enough to give to all our friends and family, and also to donate some to local food banks. So when you're growing like this and you have a substantial portion of your acreage devoted to gardening, you're going to have a ton of vegetables. So that's pretty much it, is how our garden's going to be laid out for this year. I'm going to save the actual planting using the cups and soil mixture that I will be using for that, and getting the seeds in the soil. I'm going to save that for the next video. I'm going to cut this one a little bit short so that it's not too overwhelming for people to watch in one go. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the beginning of my 2023 planting season here, and stay tuned for the next video where I will actually be putting the seeds into the soil here. That'll be coming up in the next day or two. And then you'll be able to watch them grow. I'm going to hopefully get as many as I can planted this year. It's extremely late for me to be starting this, but I've just had so much going on this winter, late winter, that I'm just very far behind. So if these seeds don't take off and I don't get them up to size in time, I will be visiting the local greenhouse to supplement with already pre-grown plants, which there's nothing wrong with that. I just try to avoid it when I can, because it costs extra money, and I try to keep my gardening as economical as possible. So anyway, I hope you guys liked it. If you enjoyed my show, please give me a thumbs up. Smash that like button down below, and if you are unhappy with my video, hit that thumbs down button twice. And don't forget to subscribe for more content. I will see you all on the next video.